Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time it is a review of the 1995 horror anthology, Tales from the Hood. Now, this is a Blu-ray that was sent to me by a good friend of mine, Jonathan Lindsay. He has sent me a bunch of different things over the years and left tons of nice words and just been incredibly supportive for me and my channel. And definitely want to give him a big shout out and some big props for sending this to me. And he's why this review is possible. I'm not super big on this slipcover. It's a little bit too busy for me. I personally prefer the original poster art with the simple but really effective skull with the sunglasses and the gold tooth. Plus, I honestly like the tagline, "Chill or be chilled." Now, Tales from the Hood is a film that I had seen years ago, and it had been such a long time since I saw it last that I didn't really have much of a recollection of what I really thought about it. So when I watched this a few weeks ago, was essentially watching it for the first time, and I really enjoyed this movie. I would say this is in my top 5 of favorite horror anthologies. I thought this was an excellent film. I thought this was terrific, and the only issues I really had with it was some of the effects at some points were a little bit chintzy looking, and then I wasn't too big on the last story as I was on the other stories. But even with that, it's not like I didn't like it. I still appreciated and respected the last story, and I liked it okay. I didn't like it nearly as much as the other segments in the film. So it's directed by Rusty Cundieff, who before this he did Fear of a Black Hat, and he worked on a few other projects. If you ask me, this is actually a really impressive directorial effort by Rusty, because he had zero experience doing horror before this, and you can't really tell that. He does a great job with the comedy bits, just like he did in Fear of a Black Hat, but in here he's tasked with doing something completely different and shooting genuinely horrifying sequences, and he manages to pull them off really well. I also thought he did a really good job creating a work environment that everybody really loved to be a part of, and when it comes to the cast and the crew. And he really he was able to think on his feet, which is something that is honestly pretty underrated for directors, their ability to think on their feet and think outside of the box. So there were certain sequences in this movie that were written a certain way, but Rusty, he thought, hey, this would be cool if we did it this way. And so the cast and the crew, they agreed, and they did it a different way, and it ended up working out really well. So I'm not really going to give away exactly what that is, because I do highly recommend people to pick up this Blu-ray. It not only has the best transfer of the film available, but it also has a really good making of documentary on here that's feature length, some commentary tracks and stuff like that. So honestly, I don't want this review to be a bunch of me telling you what happened in the film, because I think this is a good enough movie that I want to honestly leave that up to you when you go see it, because there's a lot in this film that is just really a lot of fun, and there's some really clever bits, and there's some really great stuff in it, and I don't really want to give it away to people who haven't seen it. So, and I don't want to spend this review talking about essentially what happens and what goes on. I want to give you my thoughts, and that's what you want anyway. You want to know my thoughts on Tales from the Hood, what I liked, what I didn't, and why. So I definitely liked Rusty Cundieff's direction in this. The screenplay by Rusty Cundieff and Darren Scott I also thought was quite solid. There were some moments with the dialogue where I thought it got a little bit too repetitive with the swearing and some of the slang, but other than that, I thought the script was nearly flawless in terms of its characterization, in terms of the overall stories. especially when it comes to handling political commentary for the most part. The last segment I thought was a little bit heavy-handed with it, but other than that segment, I thought it did a really good job handling these controversial or taboo subjects and handling them in a way that is done tongue-in-cheek, so it's not meant to be taken too seriously, and it didn't feel like they were shoving down any kind of messages down your throat, which is very welcome when it comes to a film that's trying to have something to say about society. I would rather the subtext be subtle or be incorporated into a package that's more palatable or enjoyable or entertaining than a series of subtext that's just there or it's in your face. I don't think it's nearly as effective in that particular way. So, features a quite strong cast. You have Clarence Williams III as Mr. Sims, who is the host of the entire affair. I loved him in this. I thought he was an absolute blast. He was chewing up every piece of the scenery and spitting it out in every scene he was in, but he was just so much fun to watch. Ah, the shit. You're gonna get the shits. You're gonna be knee deep in the shits. So I really did enjoy his performance. He was a really fun, over the top horror host. You have Joe Torry, who plays Stack, Samuel Monroe Jr., who plays Bulldog, and DeAndre Bonds, who plays Ball. These are the three thugs who show up and ask Clarence Williams III's character, Mr. Sims, at his funeral home for the shit. Because they heard that he has a bunch of shit, which is slang for drugs. And so they go up there asking him for the shit, and he tells him all these different stories about what happened to the most recent arrivals to the funeral home. And it's a fun wraparound segment. There's some really funny bits in the opening, particularly with how one of the thugs interacts with Clarence Williams III, when he makes his first appearance. That just cracks me up every time. It's hilarious. So the segments are Rogue Cop Revelation, which is the first one. Boys Do Get Bruised, which is the second segment. KKK Comeuppance, which is the third one. And then Hardcore Convert, which is the fourth segment. The framing segment is the stuff with Clarence Williams III and the thugs. And that is called Welcome to My Mortuary. Now, Road Cop Revelation, it stars Tom Wright, who you might recognize from Creepshow 2. He played the hitchhiker in the hitchhiker segment. He was the guy who was like, "Thanks for the ride, lady!" So he was Martin Morehouse in this, who is a political activist who gets beat up and beat down by corrupt cops and gets framed and murdered, and then he comes back to life and gets revenge. It was fun to see Tom Wright again in a horror film. I wonder if he did his own stunts in this particular sequence, just like he did in Creepshow 2. That would not surprise me at all. Anthony Griffith played Clarence Smith, who is a cop who is working with the precinct at the time when these dirty, racist cops beat up on Martin, and he tries to stop them, but also realizes he still wants to be a cop, so then he just kind of lets them get away with it. He also falls for their bullshit when they say they're going to take him to the hospital. That doesn't happen. So he's kind of the second lead in the segment. Wings Hauser plays the lead of the dirty cop, Strom. He did a remarkable job playing a total prick. Just an absolute asshole. Michael Massee is also in this as Newton, who's one of the cops, and Dwayne Whitaker plays the other one, Billy. Boys Do Get Bruised. It features Brandon Hammond, who plays the kid Walter, who is dealing with a monster at home, and he's showing up at school with bruises and different cuts and stuff on him. Rusy Cundieff makes an appearance as an actor here, as one of his teachers, Richard Garvey. Paula Jai Parker plays Sissy Johnson, his mother. And then you have David Allen Grier, who plays her boyfriend, Carl, who is an abusive son of a bitch. And David Allen Grier, this is one of his best performances of his career, because he really stretches his acting muscles here. He flexes them hard. I did not see this coming at all. I didn't see David Allen Grier even potentially capable of pulling this off, and he did it and then some. He was intimidating. He was just believably hard, which is hard to think about, because this is a guy from Amazon Women on the Moon or In Living Color. So it was nice to see him flex his acting muscles here as Carl. Speaking of In Living Color, I think it's Takea Crystal Kamaya. I think that's her. She has a uncredited cameo as another one of the people who's working at Walter's school. I'm going to talk about a little bit more about some extra details on that segment when I get to talking about the segments and not just, the actors and their performances. KKK Comeuppance is the third segment. It features Corbin Bernsen as Duke Metger. Corbin is a riot. He's an absolute hoot as this racist politician, Duke Metger. He gets away with saying things that I'm not going to repeat because I don't want to get in trouble. But he gets away with saying them because it's done it's done tongue-in-cheek. So it's one of those things where it's not meant to be taken seriously. And also, he's an unabashed racist piece of shit. So when he says these kind of things, it's just one of those things where it's like, you're supposed to laugh, but at the same time, you're waiting for him to get his just desserts. And he definitely does. The rest of the cast is fine too, but it's mainly Corbin Bernsen's show with this particular segment. I mean, you have Roger Guinevere Smith, who plays Rhodey. You also have Art Evans, who plays Eli. But mainly, it's Corbin Bernsen, who just carries this segment and just absolutely runs away with it. The last segment is Hardcore Convert. It has Lamont Bentley, who plays Crazy K, and his crazy hairstyle and his crazy sideburns. And you have Rosalind Cash, who plays Dr. Cushing. She was in From a Whisper to a Scream. She played the Voodoo Queen in one of the segments. Darren Scott, who is one of the writers as well as the producer for this, he was involved with From a Whisper to a Scream. The actor who played Crazy K is fine. He wasn't anything amazing or anything. The same support, the supporting actors that played like the different people that he killed that come back and talk to him when he's in isolation, those, they were fine too, but it's not really a tour de force of acting. Rosalind Cash is definitely the best one when it comes to the actors or the actresses in this particular segment. So Tales from the Hood also features a score by Christopher Young, and I thought this was a really underrated, atmospheric, creepy, moody score. Christopher Young is just an underrated composer to me, period, and his work in Tales from the Hood is no exception. I think it matches the film really well in terms of its tone and adds just a little bit more flavor and spice to particular sequences. I particularly like the opening credits bit with the urban choir and a few other things in regards to the music cues. So yeah, it was really cool to hear Christopher Young's work in this, and it's just cool to hear his work, period. I think he's right up there with the best, if you ask me. He just doesn't get nearly enough credit. The cinematography by Anthony B. Richmond, it's well done. It's I wouldn't say it's the best cinematography I've ever seen. I mean, it's definitely a lower budgeted affair, and there are certain sequences where you can kind of tell that this is like a $6 million film, or you can tell that they didn't have as much money for one segment as they had for another. I particularly liked his cinematography in Rogue Cop Revelation, Boys Do Get Bruised, KKK Comeuppance, but Hardcore Convert just felt like they ran out of money, and the sequences in the facility look really cheap. And I didn't think the cinematography was particularly that great in those sequences either. I thought it was pretty flat, but that's just me personally. The editing by Charles Bornstein I thought was actually pretty excellent for the most part. There's a lot of flashy, quick, stylish bits of editing in this, and it's not distracting, and it actually works, and works quite well with the film. It's got a runtime of like 98 minutes, and it goes by really quick. Like, this is a really fast-paced blast of an anthology for the most part. It doesn't really have that many moments where it drags on too long. And overall, I think this is like I said, I think it's a terrific film. I really do. So when it comes to my thoughts on some of the segments, I'm just going to mention a few different things about each segment that I thought was noteworthy. With the framing segments, Welcome to My Mortuary, I already mentioned the comedic bits, which I really did enjoy. I thought that was a lot of fun. Clarence Williams III was great. Rogue Cop Revelation, I thought, in particular, the stuff that really stood out to me was makeup effects or overall visuals, and also the concept. Because for me personally, nothing gets under my skin faster than dirty cops. I've seen it in movies like An Innocent Man and Lock Up and others, and dirty cops just really piss me off. And I think it's because they're supposed to uphold the law and protect the innocent. And when they're dirty and they're not upholding the laws that they're supposed to, and they're not protecting their citizens, and they're abusing them, or they're straight up killing them with nightsticks or guns or drugs, then they are in essence just as bad as any other criminal that they're trying to catch, if not even worse, because they are performing these criminal acts while wearing a badge. And then you throw in that they're racist fucks on top of it, then it's just it's a perfect storm of anger for me personally. Like, I hate dirty cops, and throwing racist cops on top of that, then it's just 10 times worse. And the script knows that, and I thought it did a really good job making these characters incredibly unlikable. Like, you hated them, you wanted them to die horribly. But they also weren't characters that were unlikable in a boring way. See, that's the thing. I'm fine with unlikable characters. I mean, characters that are despicable pieces of shit, but they have to be entertaining in some way. You have to love to hate them. And I definitely love to hate these guys, because the actors all did a great job playing their roles. Wings Hauser in particular, who always did a good job playing this kind of character. And I mean, Strom is so much of an asshole. He's like peeing on graves and shit. Like, this guy, like, he's asking for it. But on that note, that's one negative with this segment, is that Strom doesn't really get the comeuppance that I feel he deserves. It's a good effect when he gets his head ripped off, but it's not as satisfying as what happens to Michael Massee at the end of the segment. And that's because that was the original intent, was Strom was supposed to be the one to get the treatment that Michael Massee's character got. But due to scheduling conflicts with Wings Hauser, they weren't able to do that, so they had to improvise. I really wish that they were able to have it end with Wings Hauser being the one who gets crucified with needles, because that would have been so much more fitting, and would have been ultimately more of an impactful scene. But they made do with what they had to work with, so that's okay. But other than, the concept with these dirty cops and, getting away with the murder of this political activist, this black man who's trying to fight against these dirty cops and trying to clean up the precincts and protect people, I really liked the practical makeup effects in this. I thought the makeup effects that they had on Morehouse was really well done. In particular, the stuff that happens when Michael Massee is running away from Morehouse and he rips his shirt off or his chest open, and you see a glowing crack pipe and all these other sort of things inside his chest. I thought it was really unique and really cool. I also loved Morehouse's entrance when he pops up out of the grave and he has a beating heart in his hand. That was really a nice effect and a nice sequence too. And the way that they showed Michael Massee's character when he gets crucified and turns into graffiti. I also like the way that was shot and how that was particularly handled when it comes to the visual effects artists. Now, one thing I definitely want to note that I thought was really cool about this film, among many things that I thought was really cool about this movie, was the fact that Rusty Cundieff and Darren Scott, they actually made the decision to have different effects houses do the effects for each segment. So that was really, really brilliant and something that you don't see nearly enough of in anthologies. That's another way to make your anthology stand out among the rest, and to stand out in a really cool and unique way is to have each segment have a different effects artist working on it. So the first segment had K&B doing the effects, and then you have the second segment, Boys Do Get Bruised, and that one has Screaming Mad George who does the effects. And it was really cool to see Screaming Mad George's genius on display in the climax of this particular segment. I don't really want to give it away. I'm just going to say things get twisted. Because I really think people need to see the film and see these things for themselves. I'm trying to not give away as much as I have done in the past. Even though I gave away a decent amount in Rogue Crop Revelation. But with this particular one, I want to kind of leave things for people to check out for themselves. I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. David Alan Grier's performance in this is phenomenal. He's intimidating. He's believably... I know I said hard before, but that's a good way to put it. It's just one of those things where it's something that you didn't think was gonna work at all going in, but you are pleasantly surprised and blown away by the end of the segment by how well it does, how well it works, and how great of a performance David Alan Grier gives when it comes to this character Carl. I also really like the overall concept that the monster is actually Carl, and it does a good job building up to that and building up to that reveal. It also has a great message, if you ask me, that abusive people, they really are monsters. So it was really fun, and I don't know if fun is the right word, but it was really nice to see these abusive pieces of shit actually portrayed as genuine monsters. And it was a really clever plot device, if you ask me. And I also like the way that they incorporated the kid's imagination into everything too. I thought that was really quite a novel approach as well. Now, KKK Comeuppance features effects by the Kyoto brothers, so who'd worked on Critters and Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and so they do the effects for the miniature puppets in the segment. Now, I mentioned before, but I'll mention it again, just like I did with David Allen Grier, and like in all the other ones, they do a good job too. The actors too, in particular, Rusty Cundieff. He doesn't really play a character in this where he's jokey or he's just trying to be there for a laugh like he was in Fear of a Black Hat. So he also showed that he could play a character who is, in a lot of ways, just a regular guy. And so that was a really interesting thing to see from Rusty Cundieff, and showed that this guy could act, and it's really too bad that he didn't really. I mean, he directed a bunch of stuff for the Chappelle Show, so we went on to have success doing that. But I really do feel Rusty deserved a little bit better, and I feel that way about this film too. It only made $11 million in the box office, and that's not really that much of a profit. And I definitely do agree with Rusty and company when it comes to the advertising. It was advertised the wrong way. It's not really a comedy. It has comedic moments in it, but it's more of a horror film. It's a horror anthology. It's less of a comedy and more of a straight up horror anthology with some genuinely effective bits of social commentary. So there are moments in it where they're dealing with serious issues. And it's also a film that really broke some new ground when it comes to horror for black audiences, and just for black people in general. I mean, I can't really speak for, that in depth on any of that, but I'm just using words that were said by Rusty himself and others when it comes to this film, and looking at history as well, because before this, a lot of horror films that had black casts or dealt with black issues were just straight up blaxploitation movies. So Tales from the Hood, though, was something different. It was respectful to genuine issues within the black community, and that was something that a lot of people appreciated in that community as well as outside of it, because it's something that's different and fresh and innovative. And I think that's a big reason why the film still has such a cult following, is because it has such a wide scope to it. It can reach such a wide audience: horror fans, people who like social commentary and subtext, as well as black audiences or African American audiences. I don't want to offend anybody. If I did, I apologize. It's just one of those things that this is a movie that I understand has a cult following, and I totally get it, and I understand the various different reasons why. KKK comeuppance. Really like the Kyoto Brothers effects. It was really cool to see stop motion. You don't see that as much nowadays. Even back then in '95, you didn't see a lot of stop motion unless it was like a really low budget movie. So that was refreshing to see. And Corbin Bernsen, he's just an absolute riot and a half as Duke Medker. He's chewing the scenery, but just like Clarence Williams III, doing it in a way that is just incredibly entertaining. And he definitely gets his comeuppance in a very crowd-pleasing way, which apparently they had to reshoot. They ended up adding that sequence later, actually asking the production company for more money, the studio for more money so they could do it, because the test screening ended up with a lot of people wondering, like, why did it end that way? Because it ended differently in the original script and the original screening of the film. He didn't get eaten by the puppets. He just is found later hung by the American flag. So I could see why people would have liked to have seen more. Also, it added a little bit more gore to the film. The last segment, Hardcore Convert, it's definitely bloody and it's definitely intense. I will say this. This is the segment that probably has the most horrifying moments in it. And those horrifying moments are real moments of genuine horror. And it's when it shows these photos of actual lynchings of African Americans. and it is really hard to look at and hard to watch, but that's the point. And it has a great message about how you have all these instances of black on black crime, African Americans killing each other. How is that any different than what the KKK was doing, or and continues to do? You know, you're killing your own brothers. You know, it's really an interesting and quite thought provoking message. I thought it was a little bit too heavy handed at times in this segment, and I did feel that while the photos of the lynchings were effective and genuinely shocking, it didn't really match the rest of the tone of the film, so it came across as very jarring. Overall, I thought this segment was quite jarring in terms of its tone compared to any other segment in the movie. I mean, yes, you know, the one with the kid, boys do get bruised. That has child abuse and straight up domestic violence as its main plot point, but it's handled in a way where it isn't too heavy-handed. So it deals with an intense subject, but it isn't too intense in how it handles that. And so I definitely felt that way about KKK Comeuppance is in the same line as every other segment, but Hardcore Convert is the one that I didn't feel was really in that same wheelhouse, so to speak. I think that was the point, and it was effective, and I'm not super big on it, but I do respect it and I do appreciate it, and I guess I do like it okay. I mean, the stuff in the sensory deprivation tank I thought was good, you know, where Crazy K is getting confronted by the people that he killed, and there have been instances of former gang members who have seen Tales from the Hood, and it has spoke to them and really opened their eyes and their minds on how wrong it is to do what they're doing. And for that alone, I respect and honestly admire this segment, despite the fact that I'm not super big on it from an entertainment standpoint. When it comes to a wider scope and a wider spectrum, I have to say this is a great segment, because if it has that kind of reach to people who are in need of that message, that means more than any form of entertainment. Like, that has a deeper resonance that not very many films of this type, or not very many films period, have. So I give the segment huge props, despite my problems with it, just for that alone. I will say this about the segment, one more thing that I want to mention when it comes to the segment. I didn't really care for the design of the rehabilitation center. I thought it looked really cheap. And the production, the whole production and art design in that segment was really cheap looking to me. The costume design was weird. Everyone's like wearing black and white. It's probably going for some black and white thing, and I get it, but it just didn't come across that well on film. I did like the whole torture chamber he was in, though. I thought that was effective in terms of showing just how weird and crazy it is. The twist was but you know, it worked. But I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite twists, but it worked. I mean, he didn't give a fuck, and because he didn't give a fuck, he was fucked. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say about any of the segments, especially this particular one, Hardcore Convert. I know a lot of people really like the rap music in it, but it's fine. I'm not really the guy for I'm not really a rap critic. I'm not really a guy who listens to a lot of hip hop or rap, so I can't really judge the overall quality of the rap songs in this particular segment. Then the film ends with a somewhat predictable twist, because you definitely see it going this route, but it works because Darren Scott specifically said he was inspired by the Tales from the Crypt films. the 70s Amicus movies for this. I don't know if Rusty Cundieff was inspired by them either, but I know one of them was, maybe both. And they were inspired by the Amicus Tales from the Crypt film, and that's the wraparound that they used for this. And it works, despite the fact that it's predictable, and despite some really chintzy looking effects at the end of Hell. But it works because of Clarence Williams III. I mean, I love the way he delivers this line at the end when he reveals to the thugs his identity. I'm going to see if I can do this justice. This ain't no funeral home. And this ain't the Terror Dome neither. Welcome to hell, motherfuckers. and just, I love that. I love that line delivery. I love it so much. And they end up in hell. And that's the whole thing. Clarence Williams III's character, Mr. Sims, was just the devil the whole time. He's just fucking with these thugs, telling them these stories, and then at the end just pulls the rug out from underneath them. It's a fun way to end the film, and it's a fitting way to end the movie. And despite the fact that some of the effects are kind of chintzy, I still think it works. The makeup effects on the devil version of Clarence Williams III, that's great. Screaming Mad George once again did an amazing job with the effects. He's another really underrated artist. Christopher Young's an artist with his music, and Screaming Mad George is an artist with his makeup. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say about Tales from the Hood, except if I were to rate it out of 5 stars, I would give Tales from the Hood 4 out of 5 stars. The only reason why I knock it down a little bit is because, like I said, there are some aspects of it that don't really hold up that well, and I'm not super in love with the last segment. I like it and I appreciate it, and I admire the message and the help that it's provided to people, but it's not my personal favorite. I also thought the ending of the first segment wasn't as effective because of how they weren't able to have Wings Hauser be the one that ends up as the graffiti at the end. But other than that, I think, like I said, I said it many times, and I'll say it many times over. I think this is a terrific film. So, definitely highly recommended for me personally, especially if you're a fan of horror anthologies or just a fan of horror films in general. And I don't really know what else to say about Tales from the Hood other than I gave it my rating, and I don't have anything else to say about it. So thank you for watching my review, and as always, I will see you later. See ya.